Every day, people around the world drink billions of cups of tea, second only to water as the most popular drink on Earth. But behind that simple cup hides an emperor's accidental discovery, a war partly fought over trade, a spy disguised as a local trader who stole an empire's greatest secret, and a tax revolt that helped spark a revolution. Our story starts with a legend from ancient China, first written down centuries after it supposedly happened, about a mythical ruler named Shen Nong. According to the story, around 2737 BCE, Shen Nong was boiling drinking water beneath a wild tree when a gust of wind blew a few leaves into his pot. Curious about the fragrant brown liquid, he tasted it, and the legend says he found it refreshing. Nobody can prove Shen Nong himself ever existed, but archaeologists have found something the legend could not: tea buds buried in a Chinese emperor's tomb from the 2nd century BCE, proof that people were already drinking tea over 2,000 years ago. Modern researchers agree the tea plant itself, Camellia sinensis, was first domesticated in the misty mountains of Yunnan in southwestern China, the true birthplace of every cup of tea drunk today. Some of the very trees from that original wild forest are still alive today, hidden deep in the mountains of Yunnan. The oldest confirmed tea tree there is over 3,200 years old, still growing fresh leaves that farmers carefully pick by hand each spring. Tea's name split in two as it traveled the world, and the split reveals exactly how it traveled. Countries that received tea overland along the Silk Road, like Russia, India, and Turkey, still call it some version of cha. Countries that received it by sea from Dutch traders in the Chinese province of Fujian, like England, France, and Germany, adopted the local word te, which became the English word tea. Russia's own relationship with tea began with a gift. In 1638, a Russian ambassador returned from Mongolia carrying about 60 kilograms of tea for the Tsar. For the next 2 centuries, camel caravans carried tea over 10,000 kilometers from China to Russia, a journey across Siberia that could take 16 months. Merchants pressed the tea into hard bricks for the trip, since bricks survive the cold, dry journey far better than loose leaves. That long overland journey is also why Russians still brew a strong concentrate in a samovar and dilute it with hot water, a habit built for centuries of scarcity. For centuries, tea was mostly medicine, until one orphan raised in a Buddhist monastery changed that forever. In the 700s, during the Tang Dynasty, a scholar named Lu Yu spent years traveling and studying tea before writing the Cha Jing, or the Classic of Tea. It was the world's first complete book about tea, covering how to grow it, pick it, brew it, and even the best kind of water to use. Lu Yu's book turned tea from a simple herbal remedy into a refined art, and people still call him the Sage of Tea today. Tea traveled to Japan through a very different messenger, a Zen Buddhist monk. In 1191, a monk named Eisai returned from studying Zen Buddhism in China and brought tea seeds and tea-drinking customs back with him. Eisai even wrote that tea was not just a pleasant drink, but medicine for both body and mind, essential to Zen practice. Tea and Zen grew together in Japan from that point on, eventually shaping an entire ceremony built around a single bowl. In the 1500s, a tea master transformed that ceremony with a philosophy called wabi-cha, beauty found in simplicity, humility, and imperfection. He replaced grand halls with tiny tea rooms and polished porcelain with rough, imperfect clay bowls, and that quiet aesthetic still shapes the Japanese tea ceremony today. Tea stayed almost unknown in Europe until the 1600s, when Portuguese traders in Macau and Dutch traders in Fujian began shipping it home by sea. At first it was so expensive that only royalty and the wealthiest merchants could afford it, sold in tiny amounts like a rare spice. The Dutch East India Company built an entire fortune on this new obsession, becoming the first company to ship tea to Europe on a large scale. tea's fortune in England changed because of a royal wedding gift. In 1662, a Portuguese princess married the English king, and her dowry included a chest of fine tea, her favorite drink back home. She made tea fashionable at the English court, and within decades, the entire country had followed her taste. In 1706, a merchant named Thomas Twining bought a small coffeehouse on the Strand in London called Tom's and began selling fine dry tea alongside coffee. By 1717, he opened the Golden Lion next door, England's first dedicated tea shop, and by 1734 he had given up selling coffee entirely. That same shop still stands on the Strand today, and its logo is one of the oldest company logos still in continuous use in Britain. As tea grew more popular in Britain, dishonest sellers found a dark way to profit from it. Some merchants stretched real tea leaves with dried hawthorn or ash leaves, then dyed the mixture with poisonous chemicals like lead chromate to fake the right color. By 1817, public fear had grown so strong that people described tea dealers as secret poisoners waiting to enter every home. The scandal eventually pushed British lawmakers toward the country's first food safety laws, rules that still protect what ends up in your cup today. Britain's love of tea grew so large that by 1750, the country was importing over 1,000 tons of it every year and paying for it almost entirely in silver. China wanted little else that Britain produced, so that silver drained steadily out of the British treasury year after year. By the 1790s, Britain's trade deficit with China had grown into the millions of pounds, and the British East India Company needed a solution. Their solution was opium, grown in British India and smuggled into China in exchange for silver that Britain then used to buy even more tea. By 1839, opium sales to China were paying for Britain's entire tea trade, but they were also fueling widespread addiction across the country. When Chinese officials tried to shut the opium trade down, Britain responded with warships, and the conflict that followed became known as the Opium War. So behind one of the world's gentlest drinks lies one of history's ugliest trades, an entire war fought in large part to keep British teapots full. China guarded its tea-growing secrets fiercely, and for centuries, foreigners were forbidden from entering the regions where the best tea grew. In 1848, the British East India Company hired a Scottish botanist named Robert Fortune to change that, offering him 5 times his normal salary. Fortune shaved the front of his head, wore a fake braided queue, and dressed in the robes of a Chinese official, sneaking deep into forbidden tea country. He studied exactly how green tea and black tea were made, memorized the entire process, and quietly hired trained Chinese tea workers to come with him. Between 1848 and 1851, Fortune smuggled out more than 20,000 tea plants and seedlings, hidden in sealed glass cases, and shipped them to India. Those stolen plants and stolen knowledge became the foundation of the entire Indian tea industry, and within decades, India had overtaken China as the world's top tea exporter. History remembers Robert Fortune as a botanist, but by any modern definition, he was simply a very well-paid corporate spy. Meanwhile, a wild variety of the tea plant had already been grown in India all along, and local people already knew about it. In 1823, a trader named Robert Bruce traveled to the Kingdom of Assam and met Bisa Gam, a chief of the local Singpo people. Bruce noticed the Singpo people brewing the drink from the leaves of a wild plant that looked remarkably like the tea bush from China. Bruce died the following year without seeing his discovery recognized, but his brother Charles continued the work, and scientists eventually confirmed it, a whole new variety of the tea plant, native to Assam. Today, Assam produces some of the strongest, boldest black tea in the world, grown from a plant that grew wild long before any company ever claimed it. Whether you drink green tea, black tea, or oolong, they all come from exactly the same plant. The real difference is oxidation, how much the picked leaves are allowed to dry, bruise, and darken before they are heated to stop the process. Green tea skips oxidation almost entirely. Oolong is only partly oxidized, and black tea is left to oxidize fully, turning the leaves dark and the flavor bold. So the difference between a delicate green tea in Japan and a bold black tea in Assam is not the plant. It is simply time. Tea also contains caffeine, usually less per cup than coffee, along with an amino acid called L-theanine, believed to bring a calmer kind of alertness. Here is a strange twist. For decades after the British planted tea across Assam, most Indians barely drank it themselves. Nearly all of it was grown only for export. That changed in the 1930s, when falling prices left tea planters with a massive unsold surplus during the Great Depression. A new marketing board sent out mobile tea vans across India, handing out millions of free cups and teaching people exactly how to brew it the British way. Indian cooks did not simply copy that recipe. They added milk, sugar, and local spices like ginger and cardamom, and turned it into something entirely their own, chai. Across the ocean, tea was about to spark a very different kind of history. In 1773, Britain's Tea Act gave the East India Company a tax advantage that angered American colonists who felt they were being taxed without any voice in their own government. On the night of December 16th, a group calling themselves the Sons of Liberty boarded 3 ships in Boston Harbor, their faces smeared with soot and paint. Over 3 hours, they broke open hundreds of chests and dumped every last one into the harbor, an entire shipment of British tea sinking into the water. Britain punished Boston harshly for it, and that punishment pushed the colonies closer to declaring independence just 3 years later. Drinking tea now marked a person as loyal to the British king, so many Americans switched to coffee instead, a habit that still shapes the country's taste today. Back in England, tea was about to create an entirely new meal. Around 1840, a noblewoman grew hungry every afternoon, since dinner in her household was not served until 8 at night. She began asking for a small tray of tea, bread, and cake in the late afternoon, then started inviting friends to join her. That private habit spread through fashionable society and became afternoon tea, a tradition still served on tiered trays across England today. As demand for tea exploded, ship captains raced each other across 14,000 miles of ocean just for bragging rights and a cash prize. In 1866, 2 ships named Taiping and Ariel left China on the very same tide and arrived in London 99 days later, docking within minutes of each other. The race was so close that the owners agreed to simply split the prize money between the 2 crews. The fastest and most famous of these tea clippers, the Cutty Sark, still survives today as a floating museum in England, the last living witness of that era. Not every tea story starts with tea. This one starts with coffee and a disease. In 1869, a fungus called coffee leaf rust swept through the island of Ceylon, now Sri Lanka, and destroyed its entire coffee industry within a few years. A Scottish planter named James Taylor decided to try something different on his ruined estate and planted tea bushes instead. By 1872, his tea factory was fully running, and within a decade, nearly every ruined coffee planter on the island had followed his lead. Ceylon tea is still one of the most respected teas in the world, all because a coffee disease left planters with nothing left to lose. Now for a myth much closer to our own time. Who really invented the tea bag? The popular story credits a New York tea merchant named Thomas Sullivan, who around 1908 began mailing tea samples in small silk pouches to save money. His customers assumed the silk pouches were meant to be dropped straight into hot water, and the tea bag was accidentally born. But records show 2 women in Milwaukee, Roberta Lawson and Mary Molloran had already patented a mesh tea holder 7 years earlier in 1901. They simply lacked the money in the factories to sell it widely, so history quietly forgot them and remembered Sullivan instead. Here is a second myth worth busting. Iced tea was not invented at a hot summer fair in 1904, no matter how often that story gets told. At that World's Fair in St. Louis, a tea merchant named Richard Bleshenden was struggling to sell hot tea during a heat wave, so he poured it over ice instead. Fair visitors loved it, and the story of its invention spread across the country from there. But recipes for cold, sweetened tea had already been published in the American South decades earlier, in the 1870s, long before any fair. Bleshenden did not invent iced tea. He simply gave a regional habit a national stage. Far from any fair or coffee house, tea took on an entirely different job in the mountains of Central Asia: money. For centuries, tea leaves were pressed into hard bricks and used as currency across Mongolia, Siberia, and Tibet, valued over silver because you could actually eat or drink it during a famine. Traders priced horses, swords, and other valuable goods in a fixed number of tea bricks, and remarkably, some parts of Siberia still use tea bricks as currency as late as the Second World War. At the opposite extreme from a tea brick sits the rarest tea on earth, grown on a handful of ancient bushes clinging to a cliff in China's Wuyi Mountains. Those 6 mother bushes are over 360 years old, and in 2005, just 20 grams of their tea sold at auction for more than the same weight in gold. The trees have since been protected from further harvest, so every last leaf ever picked from them is already sold or carefully stored away. Tea's newest transformation happened not in a palace or a monastery, but in a small tea shop in Taiwan in the 1980s. A shop employee experimented with adding sweet tapioca balls, normally used in a local dessert, straight into a cup of iced milk tea. 2 different tea shops still argue over who did it first, but both agree it happened in Taiwan and both call it their own invention. Whoever invented it first, bubble tea turned a 4,000-year-old drink into a completely new dessert, one now sold on nearly every street corner in the world. Today, tea grows on plantations across China, India, Kenya, and Sri Lanka, feeding a global habit that never really stopped growing since Shen Nong's legendary pot. By total volume, China and India still grow more tea than anywhere else on Earth, together producing more than half of the world's entire tea supply. Kenya alone, a country that grew almost no tea before the 20th century, is now one of the largest tea exporters on Earth. And here is one more surprise. The country that drinks the most tea per person is not China, not India, and not even England. It is Turkey. The average person in Turkey drinks around 3 to 5 small glasses of tea every single day, amounting to well over 1,000 cups a year. So the next time you hold a cup of tea, remember everything hiding inside it: an emperor's accidental leaf, a stolen empire's secret, a war fought over silver and addiction, a harbor full of sinking chests, and 2 forgotten women who invented the tea bag first. One leaf blown into a pot thousands of years ago, and the whole world has been drinking the consequences ever since.